This is Spotlight from All Things Photonics, featuring intimate sit-down conversations with preeminent figures in our industry. Unscripted, timely, and topical, this series shines the spotlight on industry-leading changemakers from all corners of the photonics landscape, from the gateways of progress to the most impactful challenges of our time.
Today's episode is brought to you by Hamamatsu Corporation, a leading manufacturer of devices for the generation and measurement of infrared, visible, UV light, and X-rays. Hamamatsu is dedicated to the advancement of photonics through extensive research and offers specialized systems for select applications. Visit hamamatsu.com to learn more.
No one is sure how the ongoing trade war between the U.S. and China will end, or what its long-term impact will be. But today we are seeing its immediate impacts all around us. From Wall Street to your corner grocer, rising tariffs in a volatile market are behind increased costs and a rise in consumer prices. Among the businesses scrambling to adjust to this climate are American semiconductor manufacturers. And beyond just dealing with escalating taxes, they have to forge a path forward that navigates new export controls from China that are restricting access to the rare earths they need to keep their production lines humming. Lita Shon-Roy is the founder and CEO of TECHCET, a consulting firm that provides analysis of electronics materials supply chains and technical trends for the global semiconductor, display, solar, and LED industries. In our Spotlight conversation, Shon-Roy uncovers the origins of this trade war, its impacts on semiconductor makers, and a possible way out. Joining me today is Lita Shon-Roy, president and founder of TECHCET. Lita, we're reaching out because, there's this back and forth between U.S. and China. It's volatile. We don't know what's going to happen next. We know tariffs right now are big, but that could change. And we know China has listed some export controls on rare metals, and they've even taken measures with restrictions for some American businesses. So my first question is just kind of ask, can we take the temperature of the room for the semiconductor industry? When CEOs are waking up this morning, how are they feeling?
Well, I think people's heads are dizzy right now, trying to figure out where it's all going to settle. From the meetings that we just had with the Critical Material Council, our chip fab member subscribers, it seems that in terms of the temperature in the room, they are just waiting to see how things shake out, especially between China and the U.S. The unfortunate situation, though, is that the suppliers are preparing for tariffs, and in many cases, some suppliers may have been waiting to increase prices and have not been able to. This gives them some line of justification to do that. And so there are conversations starting to happen about increase in prices, and it is causing quite a bit of tension, a bit of stress to those that are on the buying side of materials per se for chip fabricators.
Yeah, so naturally that's going to have an impact on not just them, but the people they do business with and anyone, trying to get these semiconductors, that's going to impact them. How and kind of why do China's restrictions on rare earth exports matter in the immediate term? And how reliant is the U.S. on China for these rare earths, for their day-to-day operations?
Well, our estimate, I think our last estimate was something like 86% of rare earths are coming out of China or refined by China, or China-owned resources. So the semiconductor industry depends on just a few of them. Some of them are used for compound semi devices. Some of them are used for a particle that is a very important part of chemical mechanical planarization slurry. And for those, there's no immediate impact because people are holding a lot of inventory right now, given the change from just in time to just in case supply chain management. that was learned over the pandemic. But there is a concern that as we move forward in time, they're not holding a year's worth of inventory, maybe 1 or 2 months. That as we move forward in time, if the inventories on the raw materials are not replenished, then the compound semi side and or CMP slurries could be impacted. Now, I do have to say, excuse me, that a lot of on the slurry side, it just depends on how deep the U.S. is trying to reach. A lot of the cerium slurry that comes, cerium-based slurry that comes into the U.S. is first mineral comes from China, refined by Japan, and so technically we're not getting that product from China, and it is not under tariff restrictions that relate to China, but those that relate to Japan now. So it is, when it comes to rare earths and concerns in the semiconductor industry, there's concerns there. People are not at the moment reacting too quickly, and hopeful that there will be some moderation between the two countries to agree on how to continue trade going forward.
Mhm. And you mentioned the slurry, and I believe on the list there's something like a dozen rare earths restricted, and I think late last year, gallium and germanium were put on restriction lists from China. Does the immediate impact to, for example, the ability to source vanadium carry the same weight as the potential down the road bottleneck in the ability to source gallium and or germanium?
Vanadium is a more difficult, in my understanding. Vanadium is more rare, if you will, in terms of your ability to find large amounts of it or appreciable amount, and then have to refine it and process it. Gallium and germanium are much more prevalent in terms of the manufacturing that is going on, the production that's going on today. So yes, when you hear about vanadium being banned from export out of China, which I think they did announce last month, this is a concern. But again, they don't own 100% of the world's resources. 86 to 90, some people say 90. We think it's a little bit less, but be that as it may, the main question, which I don't know the answer to, is in terms of this overall supply chain, are those suppliers that are selling the metals that are refined that go into the semiconductor industry, the vanadium targets, for example, or evaporation sources, are their resources coming from non-China sources? And there are non-China sources out there. And then, as I think a lot of the people in the photonics space understand, once you have production that is dependent and qualified on a particular material, you can't just change, especially sometimes in the raw material side of things. If you change the raw material, it may or may not show up in the specification that you have set for your end use product. And so there's a big fear that if you change the raw material, something bad could happen to the actual device, that a reliability problem could happen. So on the semiconductor side, you really do not want to change raw material source if you don't have to. But at the same time, because of all of the trade and tariff concerns, many people are pushing forward to try to find other sources of raw materials and go forward and qualify. So it's happening, but it doesn't happen fast. This is a process in semiconductor world that takes maybe 6 months if you're lucky, if they have time. It could take a year and a half if a fab doesn't have time to actually insert it into a production line to test it out, the final device.
Got you. So, important to note, China is a controlling part of the rare earths where they have, a majority, and they're the primary dealer, but, they can be gathered elsewhere, correct?
Yes, they can be.
The other big nations, the other groups now that are maybe try and capitalize off of, you can get these from us, work with us. Is that something that's being talked about now?
Um, it is, and there are resources of minerals in various parts of the world. There are reserves in Australia. Brazil has some. Of course, China is the largest, followed by Russia, which of course we won't want to have to depend on Russia. There are also resources in South Africa. There are some resources in the US, but I don't believe there's any actual production going on today. A lot of that information is held private. The US does have capability to mine vanadium. I mean, they have resources available if they were interested in mining vanadium.
If we go back to kind of the era before semiconductors were such a big part of our landscape, were there any big events or developments that could have hinted at, uh, the possibility for the U.S. and China to get to this kind of stalemate? I mean, was there an early indicator that these rare earths, are going to be critical to all electronics and things going forward? Was there any like hint that something like this could happen, or was it just the U.S. was comfortable getting it from China, it worked, and there wasn't more consideration into, well, what happens if things go sour?
Well, interestingly enough, because I serve on the Pratt Institute Center for Technology Diplomacy, which is there's a supply chain group that I work with as a member. And in taking a look at supply chains and on the dynamics of various countries and how they manage their particular products and manufacturing of products, the one major difference that has basically led to this problem between the U.S. and China is that U.S. companies very much survive, live and die by their profit and loss. They have to have profitability. If they are not if they are not profitable enough, I won't coin a number, but for those of you who've built businesses, it's more than just 5% profitability. Cannot company in the U.S. could not survive on that. Um, because of that culture that we have in the United States, if somebody else comes in, competes at such a low price that you cannot continue selling product at that price, and you close. And so that is indeed what has happened over the years, over the last 10 to 15 years, is China has so much refining and mining going on that they have, and some say very strategically and deliberately, uh, come to the market with cheap minerals and refined minerals and metals such that it has caused other businesses in the Western world to go out of business. So Climax molybdenum is one. They have they still own um, land where rare earths exist, but the mining is very minimal, and they have changed hands several times. I think at one time, H.C. Stark, you have to fact check me on that, was involved in that as well. And together with Climax molybdenum, I think there was some sort of business arrangement between or with those two entities. But the main point here is that it was not financially profitable for them to continue actually producing or expanding in the rare earth area. That has changed a little bit since the U.S. government has pointed out that we really need more of that here. But still, if you take a look at, still, it's very difficult for them to compete with the likes of China, where they subsidize their companies. Companies there, with regard to their culture, do not need to make 20% profits or gross margins. They 5%, 2%, 0% is even fine or negative, especially if you get tax incentive if you ship overseas, right? You can survive on very little and still have a company exist year over year, where you cannot do that here in the United States. So the answer that this is a long story to a short question, and the summation of that story is that yes, there were signs that this was going to be a problem. They came up over and over again. There have been suppliers that have complained about this inside and outside the semiconductor industry. How I think it was, gosh, in the early 2000s, a sputtering target company came to me and said, I just can't compete with the likes of China. They are wrapping a $5 bill around every sputtering target, and I can't, you can't sell things and then lose money. So you stop selling, and then all of a sudden your profits, your revenue shrinks, your profitability shrinks because you don't have enough volume, and then you go out of business, right? So this is not a new playbook for China. They have done this in other industries, solar industry, LED industry, where they can build huge capability, resources, or huge enough such that the prices are low, and often you could call it, we have to be careful about the adjectives I use, but essentially they use price as a way to gain share. And it also is something that Western companies that have shareholders, for public companies, or need to make a significant amount of profit or enough profit for a Western company to survive, they cannot compete with that in many cases.
Today's episode is brought to you by LightPath Technologies. From concept through prototyping, volume production, and global distribution, LightPath has the optical and infrared imaging knowledge and manufacturing expertise to be your optics and thermal imaging solutions partner every step of the way. Visit lightpath.com to learn more.
If these American companies cannot gain access to the materials on the restriction list, we know we talked about there's situations where you plan and you build around the capabilities of a material. So now if that material changes, that it's like starting from square one. So is there an alternative workaround to materials? Or, are groups looking into how can we substitute this material? How quickly can we build a product without that and still have it meet our standards?
There are no substitutions. The only real path that people are looking at is encouraging their suppliers that provide the finished good products into the chip fab, like a sputtering target or high purity precursor, that those companies have been asked to please diversify their raw material supply chain so that they are not cut off if and when or suffer tariffs because of this trade war that's going on. So no alternatives in terms of other metals that are more available in the U.S., but the pathway to solving the problem is to second source or find alternative sources of raw material supply, which there are, and qualify those.
So for the groups kind of reading the tea leaves, because like we said, there may have been some signs earlier that maybe not to this extent, but that we could get to some sort of contentious situation between the U.S. and China. For the companies that have been, kind of trying to predict this or plan for it, what have they done to try and put themselves in a better position? Is it about, putting more rare earths in reserves, or is it trying to think about, how they plan for this kind of economic turmoil?
The companies that are particularly strategic or very highly dependent on things like vanadium, scandium, gallium, germanium, they have already, I think over the last few years, especially from the COVID days, taken a look at how to source from multiple suppliers, as well as encourage their suppliers to source from multiple suppliers. Also, there's been a lot of lobbying efforts done by large chip companies to have the government protect and or encourage development of U.S. or North America mines and refineries. And I know that there are some that are continuing to be built or developed that are in the northeast area of North America. I haven't heard latest updates, and they're very quiet about the progress and or quantities that are supposed to be coming out of there. But that's just one example of the activity that's going on, not just here, but other places like Australia as well. I know that there's a great interest in Southeast Asia to have non-Chinese companies invest in refineries and some of the mineral access to minerals there. So.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now, we've talked a lot about the impact on American companies, but I mean, this is a two-part deal. Is, what kind of impact could this have on China? Are they essentially cutting off their best customer? And are they in a better position or worse or just different position as far as, waiting this out?
It's definitely going to have an impact on them because, yes, the U.S. is their biggest customer, their biggest trading partner, from what I understand. And so with regard to rare earths and other chemicals, I can name a bunch of them. So China, we have customers that are in China, and we're very glad to be connected to them because they educate us about what their concerns are and what their needs are and how they do their business. In my opinion, many of those companies are formed by people that have done what the government is asking them to do. Oh, please build a chemical factory. Oh, please, we'll help you do that. And then what happens is you get so many of them that in order to survive, they have to decrease prices as this trade war continues and they are cut off from the U.S. They won't be able to survive because they may not be making huge amounts of profits, but to be making no money means that they will have to consolidate or fold. And the economy over there is not its best at the moment. GDP has been coming down in terms of what we see being forecasted by the IMF and the World Bank. It's never been as low as it is today in terms of its overall forecast. I think I was just looking at it, and China looking like it is well below in 2025, looking like it is well below 5%, which it's always been above, even into the teens. And the IMF is currently saying it's going to be 5% or less. Their job market has been having a tough time. Maybe not everybody knows, but we know because we have connections with people over there. Their housing market has been challenged for the last 5 years, and their economy, with the predictions that we've seen from these large organizations, large economic organizations, is coming down lower than it ever has been in a decade or more. So to continue the trade wars with the United States, I think would be extremely bad, not just for U.S. companies, but for China and China's companies as well.
Hmm. So now for the groups and some measures in the U.S. that are, we need to boost production at home. There's been some efforts to try and, produce these things domestically, but is it too late? Is it, how long could something like that possibly come up to where it can sustain at least part of the demand that is in this country?
Well, cannot happen overnight. Especially with regard to semiconductor materials. That's where our expertise is. And all those consumable types of things, whether it's gases, chemicals, or consumable equipment components like quartz and ceramics and silicon parts. When it comes to actually those consumables, those are a little bit easier to do because we have a lot of those raw materials already in place. Fabrication has gone overseas. There's quite a lot of fabrication of consumable parts in China. But to replicate that in the United States is actually fairly easy to do. And there are some companies here that could expand. So that could be a number of months, 6 months at the outset. There's still the qualification that would have to happen to make sure that the chip fab feels comfortable with any kind of new source. But when you start talking about minerals, metals, and building a mine, building a refinery, this is an order of 2 to 5 years, depending. If it's greenfield, we need permitting and analysis. It's closer to the 5 year mark. If it's already been identified source of ore and or there's already some sort of plant there, it could be a couple years because you still have to do the chemical refinery for that particular material and then put it into an end use product. When I say end use, that means like a sputtering target or an evaporation ingot that a fab would use to make their chips. So for a lot of the metals, minerals, and chemicals, we're talking a couple years probably. There are material companies here, though, that are being that do manufacture for the semiconductor industry. They manufacture things like sulfuric acid, HCl, those companies that make those chemicals, and there's some specialty gases like I think WF6, NF3. There's some of that being made here. Those companies could potentially expand. Right now, because the market has been down, I think there's plenty of capacity for them to continue as they are. It's just a matter of when the market, we do see it picking up incrementally as it really grows because of chip expansion investment, which we see to the tune of worldwide $850 billion worldwide. 24% of that is the U.S. So as that actually starts to come into being, then you will get some supply chain strain here if expansion doesn't happen. So, so if you take a look at the priority and what's particularly problematic are things that we don't really have, like the rare earths and some of the semi or precious metals. And then a little bit below that are the chemicals and gases, which, while they're not cut off, as we grow, we'll need more of those too, right?
Man. So now, switching from the rare metals to the other restrictions from China, several U.S. companies placed on a watch list or a quote unreliable entity list. What does that mean for companies like American Photonics and Teledyne that are now on this new set of restrictions?
Well, I'm not sure about those companies in particular. However, I know the watch list that you're talking about, and it is. It depends on what's on there. It depends on what they're dependent on. There are components, sometimes cheaper chips, discrete power device chips that are coming from China that these companies have designed in. And there are other alternate sources of those chips and components, but it just takes a while for them to find alternate sources that are built elsewhere, like in Europe or within the US or Japan, even. The companies that I know that from the material side of things, there are very few companies that are actually on the watch list, but it's the companies that make chips that are potentially militarily related to military applications that have put on that list, and or those that sell into military applications. As that has happened and restricts companies from getting products that they need that are upstream of them, they have to requalify another source, and they are doing that actually. Even I know companies within the semiconductor material supply chain that are, even with before all of this tariff, I'm trying to be careful of my adjective that I'm going to use about the tariffs. Before all the tariff back and forth, how about that? It came up. Companies were already looking for non-Chinese sources to replace Chinese sources.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we don't know how this is going to end, and this is the million-dollar question, and I know we don't have an answer to it, but I want to ask anyways. How does this come to a conclusion? Would can you look into your crystal ball and any prediction to see how this eventually wraps?
Well, to ask somebody that, you almost have to find somebody who knows something about psychology of President Trump and President Xi, right? So I'm not a psychology expert, although I've done a lot of business internationally as well as in the U.S. And from my own opinion, I would say that um, these these companies, these countries are trying to size up each other in terms of where are the pain points, how much can the other tolerate. And while they do that, they are also each, I'm sure of it, receiving feedback from their own staff, companies within their own country that are complaining about how this is going to affect them and actually affect their overall country's GDP. And when that happens, then flexibility starts to happen on both sides. And so what I hope for and what I hope for, and knowing people in China and their culture, is that um, once each side has been able to show the other how strong and serious they are, that they and how and as President Trump has done, acknowledge the smartness and the respect they have for the other, then they can come together, right? So this is what needs to be messaged before two parties that are very powerful, the two most powerful countries in the world, need to sit down and figure it out because it'll hurt both of them.
So, lastly, just ask what are the long term impacts of this? We know the immediate impacts of what it's doing on the markets and businesses looking for the materials they need to work. So, we won't know how the dust settles. We won't know who blinks first, but what are going to be the long term impacts from this, and I guess the lessons that we'll take away from this conflict?
If the two parties don't continue moving and communicating with each other, even if it is even through the news, they'll if somewhere along the way that conversation stagnates, then we could definitely experience a recession. How long, how deep it is, really depends on the two countries in terms of how they're going to move forward together. And I would hope so. I would hope that they do find a way to do that. From a U.S. perspective, longer term, I would hope that it would reduce our country's deficit without too much pain. But people are experiencing that pain right now, and perhaps with some good deal making or conversations that will be temporary and resolved soon. So we'll see.
Lita, thank you so much for giving us the time and the insight on this ever developing situation.
Thank you for asking. I appreciate your time.